Okay guys, you should have a packet like this. I hope I'm going to go in the right order. I don't have the packet with me, so I'm just doing my electronic version. What we're going to look at is looking at documents to determine what reasons why we should colonize or we shouldn't colonize. We're also looking at HIP analysis, what is the historical situation, intended audience, point of view, and purpose. So this first document is a document written by Commodore Dewey. Some historical situation we know about Commodore Dewey is that he was the U.S. Navy guy that we sent out to the Philippines who dealt with Amelia Aguinaldo. And he's writing to William McKinley, so many of y'all would want to say that's our intended audience. But we also realize that people in the Senate who bring in territories, if we should annex or not, are looking at this as well. And the Senate is the one really who's signing the treaty. So yes, it says Mr. President, and we want to say that's the intended audience, but we could also include the Senate. What we're going to do is we're going to highlight along about what are the reasons. So, Mr. President, you have asked my advice whether or not the United States should annex the Philippines Islands. I am amazed that any American would hesitate for one moment on this issue. There is no doubt we must have the islands. So Commodore Dewey saying we must have the islands without delay for economic and strategic reasons. So he's giving us reasons now. We're going to look at those in detail. So he's pro. Economically, the United States needs the expanded world markets. Okay, so he's saying we need the world market. We need the raw materials and new fields of investment. Okay, he says the Philippines will not only provide us with much of these, but is also a stepping stone of unlimited opportunities in the Far East. So stepping stone means that it could get us into China, which many people want to get into China. Beyond the Pacific are the markets of the world that can be entered and controlled by only obtaining naval bases in that area. So this is another reason why it's important to get involved. Naval bases. Okay. To affirm the importance of distant markets and the relation to them in our own immense powers of production implies logically the recognition of the link that joins the products, the market, the carrying trade. The three together constitute a chain of maritime power. If we're to become a great seaboard power in the Pacific, we must stand guard against German and French rivalry. So here's another reason why we should get involved, the French and German rivalry. They have aspirations of commercial extension for the colonies and for influence in distant regions. These policies have brought us into a collision course with Germany. The incident of the Samoa Islands is suggestive of their ambition. All over the world, the German commercial colonial push can be observed. So, we should get involved, because if we don't get involved, the Germans and the French are going to take it over. Strategically, the United States must have the protection from possible German aggression in the Pacific. It is our preparedness and not our acquiescence that holds back Germany even now. The German Navy now stands off Manila Bay. If we withdraw, they will certainly annex the islands. Is the United States willing to see them taken by a powerful rival? So we need them strategically, so they're not taken by a powerful rival. Militarily, here's the next reason. The United States needs the Philippines. If the Pacific states and our commercial interests in the Pacific are to be protected, three things are first needful. First, the protection of chief harbors. So this is one of the reasons why we need to protect our harbors. It won't let me highlight what I just want to highlight. Just forget that. Harbors. Sorry guys, y'all are probably looking at me thinking you can do this faster. You probably can. By the fortification and the coast defense ships. Secondly, naval forces, which alone will allow this nation to extend its influence outward. So we need naval forces. Again, I'm having the same issue. Thirdly, it should be an inviolable resolution for our nation, for our national policy, that no foreign state should henceforth acquire a coaling position within 3,000 miles of San Francisco. Okay, so let's protect ourselves. Let's create this nice little bubble so we're protected. So the islands in question are needed to maintain our Navy by allowing for coaling stations and an outer perimeter of defense. Okay, so basically that's that whole paragraph that we just did. So coaling stations and perimeter for defense. A powerful American Navy in the Pacific will induce great increase in our commercial activity and provide for an outlet of the east of our great industries. The position of the United States between the two old worlds and the great oceans have ended our self-imposed isolation. We must either expand to protect our western flanks or pay the consequence. So looking at this, he's pro-expansion. His historical situation, we know he was involved in the Pacific, and specifically in the Philippines. He was with Emilio Aguinaldo. We know his intended audience is the Senate and the President. His purpose, from reading this document, is to annex the Philippine Islands. In his point of view, he's pro-annexation. He's pro-imperialism. So let's look at the next document. I hope the next document is Emilio Aguinaldo. We'll find out. If it's not, find it in your packet. So looking at this, it says Honorable President McKinley. So it looks like the intended audience is McKinley. So for centuries, my people have struggled to free themselves from Spanish rule. Now Spain's power in these islands has crumbled. For the first time in modern history, the Filipino people dared to dream of freedom. With the help of Admiral Dewey and his forces, we have driven Spain from our land. Let it always be said that the United States took up arms to aid a neighboring people struggling to be free, and that the American people delivered the Filipino people from the tyranny of Spain. But Mr. President, are we really to be free? Have we escaped from one master to be chained to another? Has the ancient doctrine of imperialism returned to our land in a new form? Our friends in Europe tell us that you plan to annex the Philippine Islands. Your army occupies our capital, Manila. Your Navy patrols our waters. Your forces have been increased by 20,000 men in the last week. Your Congress talks of a colonial policy for the Philippines. Mr. President, you know we're at your mercy. We have little save the will to be free. Whether this war shall be known in history as a war for liberty or a war for conquest, whether the principles of self-government shall be strengthened or abandoned, whether we remain free or again to become conquered people depends on your decision. Mr. President, you know we will not willingly surrender our freedom. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this. He's basically against annexation. If you do not withdraw your army, there will be a war. Okay, he really wants annexation, right? He doesn't want annexation. He says, look, we want to be independent. If you try to take us over, we will fight. In closing, Mr. President, let me remind you of the words of Abraham Lincoln, who freed a conquered people. No man is good enough to govern another without that man's consent. Emilio Aguinaldo, the commander of the Filipino Army. So we know some historical background about Emilio Aguinaldo, but we see that this is given to us as a document, so we can't use that he's a commander as our historical context, but we know that he helped out Commodore Dewey in the Philippines in the Spanish-American War. Okay? His intended audience, again, it's not the president who gets to sign this treaty. It's not the president who gets to annex. We know that this is Congress. So we know that's his intended audience. His point of view, he's against annexation. His purpose, looking at the document, his purpose is to free his people. They want their own independence, but we got that from the document, so we really can't take it. So the next document that we're going to do, according to mine, is the Josiah Strong. If you find it in your packet. This is addressed from the Reverend Josiah Strong, delivered before the United States Missionary Council in Boston. So looking at this, we know the intended audience is the Missionary Council in Boston. Okay? We have freed the Filipinos from the abuses of Spanish rule. We cannot leave them to drift alone in the dark, aimless sea. We must keep these less fortunate people from barbarianism. We must patiently and with kindness teach these people to govern themselves and enjoy the blessings of Christian civilization. Okay, so looking from what Josiah Strong is saying, he's probably saying that we should not let them be free, right? We can't leave them to drift alone. He says we need to teach them to govern themselves, right? And we need to give them Christian civilization. Bless our hearts. The Missionary Council does not support a grab for empire, but we support a paternal arrangement. So I'm going to highlight this. A paternal arrangement. We're going to be very fatherly. Of our government towards the Philippines. This will be a heroic effort to free the oppressed and teach millions of ignorant, debased human beings. Let me fix this document. How to live. God has outfitted us with a task. Shall we shrink from it? Ours is a divine mission. Can we renounce his holy trust? Can we leave the savage to his base condition? There are so many real things to be done, canals to dig, railroads to be laid, cities to be built, people to be saved. To these, it should be poor, not port. To these poor, backward people, primitive and pagan, who sell their children into slavery, who churn narcotic plants and sacrifice animals to their spirits, we must make whatever sacrifice it takes to lead them from darkness of superstition and arrogance into the light of Christian love. So Josiah Strong, we know he's pro-annexation, paternal arrangement. He gives us several reasons, right? We look at missionary zeal here, right? The Christianity coming out. We also see white man's burden, right? These poor, primitive people, pagan, who sell their children into narcotics. So historical context with Josiah Strong, he's one of our advocates for white man's burden. So that would be outside information. His intended audience, do you think it's reaching more people, like people in the Senate? His point of view is that we need to bring in them missionary zeal. And his purpose is that we have a lot to do there. We got to help them. Hey, let's look at the next document. Hopefully it is Isidore Rainier. So, I'm sorry guys, let me just move this a little bit over. Okay, Mr. President. Again, that's not our intended audience. We know the president's not the only one to bring in territories. We know by the Northwest Ordinance, it's Congress. So I have looked over the various provisions of the Constitution of the United States, and I find no clause that empowers the government to act as a receiver for any other government. No member of Congress is more religious than I, but I do not believe in this doctrine that we are trustees under gods and civilizations of the world. Search the Constitution and you will fail to find in any one of its provisions a justification for the exercise of such authority. The government is not a foreign missionary society. You start from a false premise, and then you conclude that it is our duty as the trustee to march around on the outposts of civilization, to patrol the waters of the world, and wherever we find a feeble or degenerate race, to claim them as our trust, and then, as a chosen people of God, to impose upon them our sovereignty. So, is Isidore for or against? You're right. He says we're against, right? He says he's looking at missionary zeal, and he's saying, no, we should not go over. We should not be using the name of God. He says, I can never consent to the proposition that it's this government's function, that it is our duty to deprive a single race on earth, no matter how depraved or degenerate it may be, either in name or religion or civilization, the slightest fragment of his possession of liberty. Again, he's against it. He says they should have their freedom. I deeply love my country. I would rather see that flag lowered and trampled upon and used as a pirate insignia and raised not as an emblem of honor but as an instrument of terror and oppression to the helpless and enfeebled races of mankind. The forcible annexation of the Philippines Islands will cost this country more than its honor. Who can estimate in money and men the cost of subduing? So this is one of his reasons now we shouldn't go there. In keeping subjugation 8 million of people 6,000 miles away, scattered over 1,200 islands, and living under a tropical sun. If the question is to be settled upon the basis of dollars and cents, who will ensure that this nation, the receipts will equal the expenditures? Who will guarantee that the income from the Philippines will find its way back to the pockets of the people through taxation will furnish money? Again, he's looking at, this is going to be expensive, right? And even in the amount of investments in ships, armaments, and the equipments of soldiers is returned dollar for dollar. Who will place a price upon the blood that will be shed? If a war is to be waged for trade, how much trade ought to be demanded in exchange for a human life? So now he's looking at the business people saying, look, y'all want to go here, but really, does that cost our soldiers? Mr. President, the demand for a standing army of 100,000 men is the beginning of a policy which will increase the hours of toil and fill the homes of this land with vacant chairs. Are we, by force of arms, going to apply our system of government to the Philippine people for the benefit of the United States? Is this the great purpose of our democracy? This is the Honorable Isidore Rainier, Congressman. So we know Isidore Rainier is a congressman. They're debating this because Congress really has the authority to send troops out. And they're debating this in the halls of Congress. And he is advocating that we don't go. It's going to cost too much money. It's going to cost soldiers. It's not liberty. So we don't know much about the situation, but we know that they're debating it in the halls of Congress. Intended audience is Congress, because Congress sends men. They send and allocate the money for it. His purpose is not to allow us to go out there, and his point of view is against our ventures in the Philippines. So let's look at our next document. Hopefully this is the document that y'all have by Senator Beveridge. This is to President William McKinley. He says, as a senator of this great nation of the United States of America, I feel it my duty to advise you on the question of annexing the Philippines. It is the manifest destiny of the United States to annex these islands. Social and economic reasons dictate this course. So just by this first statement, we know he's for annexation. He says, socially, the United States is blessed with a superior culture reflected in a people of Anglo-Saxon background. So I'm going to highlight this, that we are blessed with this Anglo-Saxon background. We know this to be as white man's burden. It is the duty of the white race to pick up the burden of spreading our civilized liberty and civilization to the unfortunate darker peoples of the world. God has seen us fit to show us the way. What right do we have to keep this way of life to ourselves? We must take the Philippines in order that we may share with them our great culture and bring the message of Jesus Christ to them. So here's another reason we're bringing baby Jesus. Economically, we have been transformed from a virgin continent into one of the greatest commercial powers of the world. Frequently, the output of the American factories working to full capacity is much greater than the domestic market can possibly consume. It seems that every year we have to be confronted with an increasing surplus of manufactured goods. If American artisans are to be kept employed year-round, we must have access to the markets of Asia. So here's trade. Let's trade our surplus stuff to them. Mr. President, we should go forward to fight for humanity, but where American blood is established for liberty and law, the American people will see that blood is not shed in vain. A great civilization will arise where we establish our way of life. Annexation will allow the Filipino people to join our family as younger brothers in liberty, order, and civilization. John Beveridge, Senator of Mississippi. So looking at this, we know he's for it. We see that they're debating this even in the Senate, right? The Senate also has to deal with annexation. They have to allocate money. They have to send out soldiers. And so we see several of his reasons. He says it's for our markets, right? Business. We see we're bringing religious missionary zeal. And then we also see white man's burden. Okay, let's go to our next document. This is William Jennings Bryan. Many of you should probably know William Jennings Bryan. We know that he has run for the 1896 election. He lost against McKinley. We know he's part of the Anti-Imperialist League. We know he was a populist political party candidate. So we have a lot of historical background with him. And this is a report in a newspaper interview. He says, our nation is in great danger. The very foundation of our government is being assaulted. Our nation must give up any intention on entering a colonial policy. Our traditions and future will for all forbid our entering upon a career of conquest. He says the forcible annexation of the Philippine Islands is not necessary to make the U.S. a world power. We have been a world power for 100 years. So now we see his point of view. He says, nope, we don't need to annex. It is not our destiny to push Anglo-Saxon religion and culture throughout the uncivilized world. For we are a blend ourselves. We are American culture. And this American culture teaches us to respect the rights of others. And this will imprint our make on the hearts of all who long for freedom. So he's saying let's get rid of that white man's verdict. The forcible annexation, or even with consent, would prove a source of financial loss rather than gain. Who can estimate in money amend the cost of subduing 8 million Filipinos? So he's saying it's going to cost us a lot of money. The imperialists tell us that the trade follows the flag. This argument cannot stand in the light of facts. England, who controls India, a land 300 million, yet does more trade with us, a country of 80 million, than she does not control. So we know England has India as a colony, and it doesn't trade as much with them. The U.S. that it doesn't control, it trades more with us. So we don't need colonies for trade. It is argued that the imperialists, that the annexation of the Philippines would furnish us with a new field for investment in American capital. If there is surplus money here seeking investment, why not employ it in developing domestic enterprise? To those inquire who will haul down the flag, let us reply, who will stain the flag with dishonor. So we're looking at William Jennings Bryan, and he's against this. He's saying, look, if we have extra money for investment, let's invest in America. Let's invest in labor. Let's invest in business. Let's improve working conditions. He says, trade. It's a fallacy to say that we would trade more with the colony. He says, look, it's going to cost us a lot of men. And white man's burden and social Darwinism are not reasons why we should go. So I think we have one more document, and this is President McKinley's decision. So he says, I walked the floor of the White House night after night until midnight. And I'm not ashamed to tell you, gentlemen, that I went down on my knee and I prayed to the mighty God for light and guidance more than one night. And one night it came to me this way. I don't know how it was, but it came. 1, we could not give them back to Spain. That would be cowardly and dishonorable. 2, that we cannot turn them over to France or Germany, our commercial rivals in the Orient. That would be bad business and discreditable. 3, we cannot leave them to themselves. They were unfit for self-government, and they would soon have anarchy and misrule over their worse than Spain's war. And 4, that there was nothing left for us to do but to take them all, and by God's grace do the best we could by them. And then I went to bed, I went to sleep, and I slept soundly. And the next morning, I sent for the chief engineer of the War Department, our map maker, and I told him to put the Philippines on the map of the United States, and there they are. So, looking at this, we see McKinley has decided to annex them. This is going to lead to several reasons. Here he said it's going to be cowardly to give them back. We can't give them to our rivals. They were unfit for government, kind of white man's burden there. And by God's grace, right, we have missionary zeal here. So we will acquire the Philippines Islands. This will lead to war. And we looked at documents, so I don't know. After this, if we have time, let's start on Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson's PowerPoint on imperialism.